Now, Professor Noakes, subsequent to the complaint to the Health Professions Council, and bearing in mind, which is common cause, that you are well known in respect of low carbohydrate, high fat diets, what has been the personal cost to you?
I'm not going to take too long about this because I can understand that people might not think that this is relevant, but I really do think that it's important for people to understand that when you take action against a person like myself, there are going to be consequences for that person. And when the HPCSA decided that they were going to prosecute me, that people really need to understand that there are consequences to that decision which have to be considered. And I'm going to shorten this as much as I can, and I'm not going to be aggressive to people or anything. But it raises the question, why in science do we have to attack the person? Because science is about ideas, it's not about people. And I want to show you how I've been attacked as a person. And then I will try to explain it on the basis of the book that I've recently read called Galileo's Middle Finger. And that explains why currently the culture is that if you disagree with a person, you attack them. You don't attack their science. And that has been my big frustration, that I've been attacked remorselessly, not for the science. People haven't said you're wrong. Well, they've just said you're wrong. And they haven't presented the evidence to discount me. So what I'm trying to say is that I'm very happy to be here, but I'm here because I'm a scientist trying to present information. I'm not here because I'm a bad guy who's trying to kill people and this, that, and the other, which is the way I get projected. And so I want to show the way I've been presented in the media and appeal to the media to understand, the way things turn out. So all I did was to write 3 books, and in which I discussed these ideas about how carbohydrates are perhaps not so good and we should eat more fat. And I wrote this article, which we've been through, which was the anecdotes of people who reported to me that they had benefited. And then then a couple of blogs appeared, and there was an article in the Daily Maverick, and then all of a sudden I thought, well, things are changing. Suddenly people are putting me in the crosshairs, not the ideas. And so the first article that was published in the national press had this as a title: Is Tim Noakes the Malema of medicine? Now, I don't think that that's a highly complimentary title. They could have said, is Tim Noakes the Mandela of medicine? But they didn't choose that. They chose... And so this is written by a medical doctor. And so the article is reasonable, but it's unfortunate. Cardiologists question if Noakes is the Malema of medicine, a man with a horde of followers. So the word horde is judgmental, and considerable media sway, is capable of producing charismatic, easy to hear. So, Madam Chair, when you become the focus of all this interest, the question is, why don't you just quit and let it go? And I think I've made the point repeatedly that I do not need to be registered with the Health Professionals Council of South Africa, because the only reason that I'm registered is so that I can provide medical cover in terms of insurance to my researchers who work in my laboratories. That's it. Because someone in the team must have medical insurance in order for the research to go ahead. And so although I've not practiced, and I've confirmed that I last practiced medicine in 2000, that was when I had worked in a medical practice. I haven't worked as a doctor since 2000. The only reason I have health professional counsel is so that I can have medical cover, so that I can continue to do the research and have the cover that I need. So when the charge was sent to me, I could have said, that's it, I'm not interested. I will just retire, resign from the HPCSA, and it all gone away. But the South Africans would have interpreted that in one way, that I was wrong, and I was guilty, and I'd quit. And I wasn't prepared to accept that. So I've decided to take all the unhappiness and the toughness that I had, and which you can infer from all the media material, but I now want to get to the focus. Why did I do it? Why did I fight all that? Why did my family support me? And I'm going to show you why. So I believe that if you understand the biology, you can observe things. And I already knew by 2005 that Lance Armstrong was the biggest doper the world had ever seen. And I was asked to write this editorial for the top journal in the world, the New England Journal of Medicine. And I don't know why they asked me, but anyway, I wrote the article. And I wrote this: is it possible for the natural athlete who competes without chemical assistance to achieve record-breaking performances in sports requiring strength, power, speed, or endurance? Because doping tests are infrequently positive in international sports, it's been widely believed that the answer is yes, and that few athletes competing in major sporting events, including the Olympic Games and the Tour de France, use performance-enhancing drugs. But multiple sources of evidence, including personal testimony and ever-increasing incident of doping scandals, suggest the opposite, that widespread use of performance-enhancing drugs has fundamentally distorted the upper range of human athletic performance. Unfortunately, a global code of silence has kept the problem hidden from public view. So what I'm saying there is that everyone is doping, including Lance Armstrong, but I don't say it. But when I lectured and when I was asked privately, I said that this man is doping. And in fact, I was asked to speak in Cape Town with Lance Armstrong, and I told Ilana Meyer, who invited me, I said, Ilana, I will not be within 100 miles of that man, so please don't ask me. I'm not going to be speaking with him. And I finished the article, and this was Werner Reiterer, who was one of the Australian athletes who was doping and who was on the verge of winning Olympic gold medal in the Sydney Olympics. And he decided he couldn't go through with it because he was using steroids. He knew it was unfair, and he didn't want to win a gold medal and his children to discover that he'd used drugs. And so he retired 6 months before what he would have won the gold medal. There was something pathetically wrong with the fact that a packed home arena, an entire country would urge me on without any concept of the truth behind my ultimate athletic achievement or of the sham of which they were unwittingly a part. And so I finished the article. Our burden is that no longer do we share this ignorance. We can no longer pretend that we do not know. And so the responsibility of us, once you have a belief, you have to let the world know. Now the question was, what is the cost of taking on someone like Lance Armstrong, which I did not do? And the answer is, it is astonishing. And the person who took Lance Armstrong on was David Walsh. And David Walsh concluded in 1999, on the basis of his own experience and knowledge of cycling, that Lance Armstrong was a doping athlete, and that this whole media scare surrounding him was false, and that the public were being misled. And he concluded that in 1999 because of his dramatically improved performances. And it would be 13 years before Armstrong doping was exposed in 2012, when he was stripped of his Tour de France victories and banned from competitive sport for life. And for those 13 years, this man was vilified for taking that position. And ultimately, the prosecuting attorney agreed with Walsh that Lance Armstrong perpetuated what might well be the most outrageous, cold-blooded, elaborate lie in the history of sport. So what do you do if you are David Walsh and you know that this is the most elaborate lie? You either keep quiet or you do something about it. And he chose to do something about it. And he wasn't the only one, but he found the sources of people who were dissatisfied and had evidence that Armstrong was cheating. And he asked the question, how can you reveal the truth if those to whom you are speaking don't want to hear? And then he asked the question, these were the people who came out against Armstrong and were profoundly vilified. Emma O'Reilly, Betsy Andrews, Stephen Swart, and so on, Greg LeMond. Was their willingness to tell the truth at a time when there was nothing in it for them except vilification and other forms of bullying. And that's how we respond to people who threaten our conventional beliefs and challenge us. We vilify them and we bully them. And that is not the way it should be. And the person who was most attacked was this man, Greg LeMond, and his life almost went into tatters as a consequence of being truthful and not lying down in front of the evidence. And this is what his wife said, because the wife is the one who is the most important in sustaining the strength of the person being vilified. Greg's reputation, our business, our children's teenage years were all consumed by a vicious vendetta against Greg and our family because we wouldn't go along with the lies. Greg and I made the decision that even though the fallout would be terrible, There was no other option but to be honest about what we knew of Armstrong's doping. So that's the issue. You have the opportunity, the chance or the choice. You either go for it and you take the vilification and the humiliation, or you quit. And in my opinion, for some of us, there's no choice. We have to go for the truth. Now, this is honestly the final few slides, and it's the last book that I would encourage you to read, and it's just been published a few months ago, and it's called Galileo's Middle Finger, and it's titled Heretics, Activists, and the Search for Justice in Science. And it's a remarkable book. And of course, you know Galileo's story, that he declared that the earth rotated around the sun. And as a consequence, for 100 years, well, he was put under house arrest. He wasn't quite burned at the stake, but he would have been. And it took 300 years for the Pope to forgive him for saying that, for saying what was truthful. And the middle finger is the story that when he was reburied, so when his body was exhumed to be buried in a proper place, someone took his middle finger, and it's now sits in a museum. So that's the middle finger, and of course the middle finger has certain connotations. So anyway, what is the book about? And this is her conclusions. Now, it turns out that she discovered that in writing about certain scientists, she became vilified. And she began to understand what was driving the vilification. And this is what she concludes. And she concludes that science and ethical science is utterly essential for justice in society. You don't have justice and science. The two are intimately linked. And without honesty in science, you will not have justice. So she says, science and social justice require each other to be healthy, and both are critically important for human freedom. Without a just system, you cannot be free to do science. Without science, and especially science understanding human behaviors, you cannot know how to create a sustainable, just system. As a consequence of this trip that she went through, which she was humiliated and vilified, etc., I have come to understand that the pursuit of evidence is perhaps the most pressing moral imperative of our time. I repeat that, the pursuit of evidence is perhaps the most pressing moral imperative of our time. All our work as scholars, activists, and citizens of democracy depends on it. Yet it seems that we are building up a system in which scientists and social justice advocates are fighting in ways that poison the soil on which both depend. What she's saying is that when science conflicts, the findings of science conflict with what social justice advocates believe should be taught or reported in the media, the social justice activists will try to shut the scientists down. And they will do it through vilification. And the whole book describes how that happens. It's high time we think about the mess we've created, about what we're doing to each other and to democracy itself. So she continues. Galileo could not be arrested for suspicion of grave heresy in America. Why is that? And the answer is that the reason is that the activists who founded the United States, the founding fathers, understood the critical connection between freedom of thought and freedom of person. That freedom of thought and freedom of person must be erected together. That truth and justice cannot exist one without the other. That when one is threatened, the other is harmed. That justice and thus morality require the empirical pursuit, which is the scientific pursuit of truth. That you cannot have justice and morality without unimpeded pursuit of empiricism. And this, I think, is the second last slide of this series. To scholars, I want to say more. This is the final bit of the book. Our fellow human beings can't afford to have us scholars and scientists act like cattle in an industrial farming system. And that is relevant to nutrition and the way we teach nutrition and the way we understand diets. If we take seriously the importance of truth to justice and recognize the many forces now acting against the pursuit of knowledge, the forces acting against the pursuit of knowledge, and I ask that the media should not be working against the pursuit of knowledge. If we really get why our role in democracy is like no other, then we really ought to feel that we must protect each other and the public from misinformation and disinformation. And what frustrates me, and I'm not going to go to any length, is I should have been protected, not attacked, by my university. My university should have said, you have every right to pursue what you believe to be true. Instead of actively humiliating me by writing a letter to the Cape Times, in which they distanced themselves from me and said that my ideas were dangerous. The university does not have the right to do that. Individuals do not have the right to do that. Their responsibility is to protect those people who are promoting empiricism and science. That was an academic debate. It should never have got into the media. It was the worst moment of my life, reading the Cape Times and reading that I'd served the university for 35 years. And there was the letter. Yeah. And that was utterly unacceptable. And so my point remains that we have to protect the scientists. And it's an academic issue. It's not a personal attack because I happen to think differently. So, and she finishes the book saying, here's the one thing I now know for sure after this very long trip. Evidence really is an ethical issue. The most important ethical issue in modern democracy is getting the evidence out and protecting the evidence and protecting the scientists who are providing that evidence. If you want justice, you must work for truth. If you want justice, you must work for truth. And if you want to work for truth, you must do a little more than just wish for justice. And that's why I'm here, because I'm working for truth. I'm not just wishing for justice. I'm going to make sure justice is served. And what I've done is tell you what I believe to be the truth. And that's, I hope that I've managed to get that message across. And whatever it's cost me, I want to thank you all for being here and for giving me this opportunity. And thank you. I apologize it's taken so long, but it's been cathartic for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just Professor Noakes, just two matters that I want you to address. One of them is, during the evidence during the cross-examination of Professor Foster, the idea of the bliss point was traversed. Can you, Professor, just explain what the bliss point is?
Indeed, the bliss point was developed by an American food scientist who worked out that it is possible to have a specific combination of glucose, fat, and salt in any particular food that will increase your desire to eat that food. And so what he did over many years was to test different combinations of salt, fat, and sugar in different concentrations and studied the human response. And he found that as you got to the ideal concentration of these three substances, people would eat more and more and more, and then as you went beyond the bliss point, they would choose to eat less and less of that food. And the bliss point then was the ideal combination of salt, fat, and sugar that produced the maximum attraction to that food and the maximum intake. So that was called the bliss point. And the bliss points were used then to start marketing or selling all the processed foods to make sure that you ate as much as possible of these particular foods because of the addictive nature of the food that you were eating.
The second point, Professor, is just in respect of clarification. Yesterday, in your evidence, you mentioned teratogenesis. Can you just explain exactly what teratogenesis is?
Yes, I think I made an error because teratogenesis is the development of abnormalities in the fetus as it develops, and so that the parts of the body will develop inappropriately and as a result of some environmental influence. And the classic case is thalidomide, that mothers who took thalidomide during pregnancy were very likely to produce children who had developmental abnormalities. So that was thalidomide-induced teratogenesis. And we were referring to the role of glucose or ketone bodies in producing teratogenesis in an animal model. And I incorrectly suggested that this was cancer. It wasn't. It was fetal abnormalities. So the probability that fetus would be born with an abnormality in, for example, limbs or brain or eyes or whatever, that refers to teratogenesis.